4 o'clock. Again, just letting everybody know, we are going to be starting here in a few more minutes. Everyone is going to be muted upon entering into this webinar today. This looks a little bit different than the one that we did last week. It is because this is a webinar based, so that way we can have more participants, but everyone will be muted when you come in. So you can either type your questions in the chat box or you can email your questions to Lori at National REIA. So give us just a couple more minutes and we'll be getting started.
At 4 o'clock. Yeah,
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am Ryan Coleman, president of the National Real Estate Investors Association. Obviously, we would like to be meeting on in a different situation, but we are here to support all of our members and all of you guys around the country during this crisis, the COVID-19. Today, we're going to have our two panelists. We have Jeff Greenberg of Greenberger Brewer LLP, and then we also have Charles Tassell, our COO, who is also our Director of Legislative Affairs. And they're going to be talking to you guys about any updates. And there's also a lot of questions at this time as far as, real estate related eviction processes and these things. There's a lot of concern, obviously, with our landlords all over the country as well. So before we get started with our panelists, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca McLean, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Ryan. First of all, I'd like to say a thank you to Home Depot Pro. Our broadcast is sponsored by them. For those of you who don't know, we have special programs for investors through the Home Depot Pro program. It includes things like discounts on paint, up to 20% off from the day you join, rebates, and other National REIA exclusive programs. If you have questions about that program, please reach out to your local REIA group or reach out to us here at National REIA. National REIA is a 501c6 trade association. We've been around for about 35 years, and we're a federation of local associations that support the real estate investing industry. Basically, we are here for networking, education, support, leadership on legislative issues, and promoting professionalism and standards of excellence in our industry. And we wanted to make sure that we thank you, one, for being on the call, and two, for being a member of your local association. It is so important in these times. If you were with us last week, you heard me say, it's more important than ever to be a member at your local association. First of all, they pass on the National REIA information to you, and they also provide local updates, because so much of what we're going to be talking about, both Charles and Jeff will allude to this, so much of what's happening happens at the local level. And so being connected to your local group is more important now than ever. We also have other resources like the Home Depot program that will help you save money, get some better benefits during this time, and take full advantage of your membership to do that. If you're a member also, you have access to our website. We will be doing updates through our voter voice program. As some of these packages come to the forefront, we certainly want to make sure that we are the voice for the real estate investment industry and ask for help where we need it as an industry as well. So Voters Voice is available to you as a member through our National REIA website, so you can express your needs through that to your congressman as well. We also have Real Estate Investing Today, which is our news site that even in normal times has updates for the industry, news stories, infographics, things that keep you in touch with your industry. We have a weekly roundup that is a basically roundup of all of the most popular posts for the week. It comes out to you in your email, so you can sign up through that through the National REIA website. We have ongoing update emails, both legislative emails and others, and we have our update virtual meetings that we have available for you now. That does not include all of our publications like the Real Estate Journal and the ROI, but all of those are benefits of membership. We also know that some of you may be visiting with us that are not members of a local group. You can go to our website to make sure that you are connected to the local group in your area and click here on the Find a Local Group page. For those of you who want to stay connected on a very regular basis, because things are happening every day and we do endeavor to keep the site updated, you can visit here for the National REIA website on the Corona updates. So it's simply nationalreia.org and then the COVID update. The COVID update looks like this. We do have the top part that's for investors. We've got an FAQ that we're trying to continue to keep updating. The ban on evictions we're trying to keep as updated as possible. Please be patient with us as some of this information is coming out faster than we can actually get it logged. So stay updated with us, visit the site often. There are downloadable resources, and any of the communications from HUD are here. We are also endeavoring to keep you informed by some articles from news sources that we feel comfortable with. That's a little difficult sometimes to know what reliable sources are. We do want to let you know that these are specifically articles, not necessarily updates from people like CDC or HUD. So please note the difference in these articles and other updates. They're from other organizations and or news media that we feel is commenting on coronavirus that actually affects our industry.
Rebecca,
Today, our call, as Ryan said, is with Jeff Greenberger. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being with us, and our very own Charles Tassell. We're talking about the biggest questions that we've gotten, the largest volume of questions that we've gotten are on evictions. And I think this chart, which we will be updating on real estate investing today as our infographic, I think this chart speaks to why we are concerned about this. This is the chart of the week from the Mortgage Bankers Association, and it shows unemployment claims. And if you'll notice, we have a really high unemployment claim volume coming into the end of 2009 or first of 2009 at 665,000 claims. And then I don't know about the rest of you, but it took me a moment to see the end of the chart. I was like, okay, 2019, it's there. And then I didn't realize that the indicator was that high. And so I had to really take a moment to pay attention to that, because it's now at 3.3 million claims in one. It's an increase of 3 million over the course of 1 week. So we went from 300,000 basically to 3.3 million. This level of claims not only broke the previous record of 695, which dated back to 1982, it also dwarfed the 660 weekly levels seen in March 2009 of the Great Recession. So this is why we're concerned. We know that some of our residents may be having some challenges and are turning to us for guidance. So at this point, before Jeff begins to speak, I want to make sure that you see our disclaimer. Please take a moment to read through it. I am not going to read it to you, other than to say, other than Jeff, Charles and I certainly are not legal professionals, and Jeff is not giving you legal advice for your use in your area at the local level. We are talking in broad policy and giving some suggestions that you may want to address with your own local attorney. Please understand that all evictions and most law in general is going to be at the local level, will need to be reviewed with your local attorney and need to be viewed in light of what's happening there in your area. So we're not making any legal claims or giving any legal advice. We're only coming to you with general guidelines and general discussions on this topic. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our panelists, Charles Tassell and Jeff Greenberger. Charles, I'm going to let you take it away.
thank you, Rebecca. And I'm actually going to back up one step, back to our COVID page. One of the questions, we had some questions early on what the legislation was, what it was going to be. And even today, we're realizing that in the 880 pages that was passed by the House around 1 o'clock today, there were changes from what was originally said was in the Senate bill that passed on Wednesday. And it's taken this long for people to realize, wait a second, I thought this was in there. No, it's not. So we've been trying to be cautious on what we put up. Reporters have been reporting about a variety of issues, some of which are actually not in the bill. So we've been trying to be very conservative on that side to make sure we're not putting out bad information. And I would suggest to you that you're going to see some hype over the weekend, even as people are looking at it. The bill is going to be a searchable version. It'll be on our website as well. That is being uploaded very soon. And then additionally, we'll have legal updates and experts on each piece, whether it's the IRA distribution aspect of it, the tax exemption aspect, how you can expand on depreciation and recapture rates. There's a number of pieces like that that are in there that we will be providing information on once they've actually had some feedback. And for example, the SBA is kind of at the center of this. Their heads are spinning right now with everything they're trying to keep up with. So as that material comes out from SBA in a solid, good governance, good guidance, and respectable guidance, we will push that out. But until then, we are not going to push out information that is one reporter said something and another reporter responded to that and followed up on it. I don't want to put our people in that situation. The one thing I will say is reach out to your local banker, and whether they are or are not part of the SBA program, get in touch with them so that when the SBA applications open up, you are first in line to process with that and move forward, and ask them what it is they need for their application.
There have already been a few questions on the SBA, by the way, Charles. Just to let people know, the general guidance and the initial information put forth by the SBA is on the National REIA website. It's a little bit near the bottom. You can find it there. Please take advantage of what we already have to give you some general guidance of what you're going to need as you prepare for applying for those loans. We will give you more information as it comes to us.
I think there's a 1-pager, there's a 2-pager, and then there's a 7-pager that goes into some more detail. Take a good look at those. Those are documents that are straight from SBA and the Small Business Committee. So those are solid documents. That is fact. Now, one of the things we kind of want to lay the groundwork on is on evictions. Eviction is typically a local issue. It is a local court, whether it's a municipality or a county. It is handled differently in each different area, which is why we make the comment that we're speaking broadly, because each area is going to have its own language. It's going to have its own courts. One of the things I want to address, though, is at the federal level, there has been discussion, and it came out that, hey, there's going to be a national ban on evictions, and it made our heads spin when that came out. First of all, on what authority? And eventually that authority has come out, and it has been reinforced in the language that was passed in the law as of today, and will be signed by the president, I'm sure, very shortly, even stating things like there's 90 days versus 120-day moratoriums versus, and those are things that are going to be worked out, and we'll be getting more information on that. One of the things you want to do over the next 3, 5, 6 days is find out if you've got a mortgage through a bank, if it has FHA attachments to it, if it is Fannie Mae, Freddie Mae, whatever your property is, find out if it has that if it is funded or backstopped by them. If it is, you may be part of this process where you are required to put a moratorium on evictions. If not, you're part of the general marketplace. Now, if you are a general marketplace, but you still have Section 8, you have a housing choice voucher resident, you are going to fall under that moratorium on evictions. So those are kind of the two pieces where most of our folks are going to become involved or bump up against that federal moratorium. Everything else is going to be at a local level. And there are at least 36 different cities that have stated various levels and types of moratoriums and bans. And to kind of delve into that is where I'm going to kind of pass it off to the attorney side of things with Jeff, and open up the discussion of what you need to be asking and the questions that, if we can arm you with the proper questions and the proper process, you can protect yourself.
Before you get started, Jeff, I just want to say on our website, where we have the list of areas that have considered, are considering, or have passed either a pause, a stay, or a ban on evictions, we do list them at the state level. But if there is a city within, a large city at least, within that state, we do try to call that out if they have something different. Please note, I cannot have my staff monitor every single city and county within every single state. There's just no way for us to find that information. So what you're going to see are large cities, and besides that, that's who's generally passing these things. You're going to see the large cities called out if they're doing something different than their state is doing. Does not mean your little locale has not decided that they've passed something separately, and therefore it would not be listed if it's not something that is getting enough attention for us to be able to find it and post it. So that's why I'm saying we're trying to keep you as updated as possible. We generally are being notified of the states, not necessarily being able to keep up with the locals. And I'm sorry, Jeff, please take it away.
No, I'm happy to let you fill in the blanks. So, hi everyone, thanks for having me. The thing about this is as much a political hot potato as anything else, and that's why we're seeing so much difference in how this is being handled on really a very, very micro local level. I sit today talking to you from Ohio. The Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice has said we shouldn't stop evictions, and the Ohio Supreme Court has said we will not order a stop on evictions. The federal government has ordered some form of moratorium on evictions if you are attached to some sort of federal funding, like Charles said. I won't repeat all that again. But then the courts themselves are closing, right? So there's a real difference between a ban on evictions, and we are seeing even some of the most local elected judges in some of the smallest jurisdictions you can imagine, for political reasons, I believe, banning all evictions, saying they can't be started, they can't be filed, they can't be heard. And then we've got sort of the next more amicable level, which is the eviction isn't banned. It's simply that while you can file it now, it's not going to get heard, right? We're hearing hearing dates. The first resumed hearing dates in a lot of jurisdictions are late May, early June. So you may file it as we sit here today in late March, and you may be filed. The clerk may cash your check. It may get served on the tenant, but it's not going to get, the hearing date they're going to get is going to be late May or June, and that only presumes things get better by that time. And then we sort of have the sort of other piece of all this that judges are having trouble working out, which is, what do you do when it's not a non-payment of rent eviction, and it's evictions that really, for lack of a better term, have to happen? Very bad violence type situations, substantial breaches of the rules that are causing health and safety issues to other residents around the building or in the building, those sort of evictions. And the court systems generally don't have any idea what to do with those. Kentucky, which appears to maybe have banned evictions, we're not really clear on that, by the governor's order, is doing teleconferencing for evictions that have components in it that threaten health and safety lives of the other residents, or substantial damage to the buildings. How you get one of those hearings, we have no idea. No one seems to know. So before I move on, this is something you either need to discuss with your local attorney, but more likely you're going to have to keep in touch with your local clerk of court to see if they're even accepting evictions at this time. And that's if you want to file them. And is that what you want me to move on to, Rebecca, or did you want to pose something else at this point?
I think it would be good to move on to that particular discussion next, and then we'll keep going.
Right. So the sort of the number one question I'm being asked by my clients right now is, let's say I can file evictions, should I? what are the optics of that? Is the TV station going to show up now with a microphone on a boom in my face and try to make me look like the evil real estate investor? My answer to that question is, it's up to you. There is no right answer. But what I would say to you in saying that is, that clearly means that the right answer also isn't a complete moratorium on filing if you're allowed to. And here's where my head is. This is what I tell my folks, which is, to anyone that will reach out to you, to anyone that will be in contact with you, whether you solicit that contact or they initiate it first, I'm going to work with you. I'm going to do everything I can in the short term to try to make it work and try to keep you as a resident, but I'm going to be looking for some amount of money. Sort of no pay, to me, is not a resolution. Now, it may be delayed payment. It may be till that check comes from unemployment, or that check comes from this bill that we don't even know what's in it, that may get signed by the president in the next day or two. But you got to pay me something. You got to work with me. You got to show me the cutback in your hours, because unfortunately, for every person who's really suffering through this right now and needs our help, I'm not going to say it's a one-off-one ratio, but there's some percentage of people who are just looking to see what they can get for free, even though they may not need it. And so I want to see some form of communication and some form of payment. And my clients are doing everything under the sun, from simply foregoing late fees and other charges to pushing partial payments out to be repaid in other months. I even have one client that's extending leases in order to roll the rent in full out to the back end. Now, of course, you're not going to give it away for free on the back end either, but they're extending the leases to make those payments work. I also have a couple clients who have switched to weekly, dividing the rent up into weekly payments, so it'll match up better with the unemployment checks and not exhaust one full unemployment check. When you do any of those sorts of things, please work with your local attorney to have some sort of document that memorializes that, right? To do it without some sort of written document may look like rent forgiveness, or may look like a lease waiver, the waiver of the right to collect that late fee, or the waiver of the right to collect late fees going forward, or long-term switching to weekly rent payments, etc. So you will have to work with your local attorney to come up with some sort of form payment agreement that matches up with what you want to offer. And before I flip it back to whoever wants to talk about this next, let me just remind you from the fair housing context, if you're going to offer this, you have to offer it, at least make it available to any of your residents. You can't cherry pick and choose. These are good long-term residents who happen to also be Caucasian. You really have to be sure, if you're going to do something, at least all of your residents are made aware that there's an option. Now, that doesn't mean you have to offer the exact same plan to everybody. You can do it being consistent based upon financial calculations, right? You lost 70% of your income. I'm not going to ask you to pay as much in rent this month or next month as I'm going to ask someone who's lost 30% of their rent. That is consistent as long as the math is consistent, right? That doesn't mean you're treating people differently. It means you're applying a formula that you've predetermined to this situation based only on the color green, right? What is it you've got in your pocket? What is it you can afford to pay me, and how can I work that out and save you as a tenant? I just want to bring that home by saying, to me, and I may be in the minority on this, and I know that this is not good community building and all that sort of stuff, but to me, the residents who bury their head in the sand and absolutely refuse to communicate with you and are not paying you, if you are allowed to file an eviction, I think you want to go on record now by filing that eviction to say, hey, we may not have this heard till May or June, but I want you to know we are not operating this as charity, right? I mean, we'll work with you if you want to be worked with, but if you're just going to just not pay us and see what happens, this is what happens. I had a TV station speak to me as a representative of a client the other day, and they were like, don't you feel awful trying to collect rent? And I said, I saw your own news story the other day, and you said people are having trouble making rent. I would have assumed from your own story that you would have expected rent at some point, at some level, to be part of what people are using their unemployment checks and their other benefits for. And then I said, and it didn't make it to the story, I suppose I should assume from that you're giving the advertising away for free right now, right? And they were like, no. Like, yeah, well, I mean, if it's not free to advertise on your TV station, why on earth is it free to live in this person's business who has to pay a mortgage and pay utilities and pay insurance and all those other things? And they kind of snickered at me, and of course that absolutely made it to the editing room floor. But and I'm not telling you to be snide to TV stations if they catch you with a camera in your face, but that's the way I look at it. We're in a business here, and be fair to us, we'll be fair to you, and we will all make it through together as long as people don't take advantage. Is that a good start, Rebecca?
I think that's a really good start. First of all, I wanted to thank Jeff for explaining it that way. I think that's absolutely correct. I also want to let you know that communication, asking your residents to be proactive, sample letters are available on our site for that. Please take advantage of it. And work with your local attorneys for the actual documents that you will need to sign, because you'll need to make sure that they are bindable and enforceable in your area. And depending upon what's happening there, you want to keep a finger on the pulse to make sure that you're acting appropriately in those areas. Also, Jeff, I want to say this and ask your opinion. For some of us who don't have maybe significant, or maybe this applies to everybody now that I think about it, my concern would be for us that if we're not at least flexible with the tenants or residents that we want to keep, we come out of this thing and we're already going to have people that are going to have to move back in with parents. They're going to have to maybe friends move in together because they have now had limited income and they're trying to be budget conscious. Their lease is expiring and they have to make other choices. So, if we're not working with residents, we could wake up in June or July and see 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 units open. And then how are we going to fill them if potentially the market isn't as excited about, being a renter as they were previously, or they don't maybe have enough income for the down payment and getting the utilities back on or whatever than they would have had. So I think being prudent in a business sense about working with residents that have been good residents, that have paid, that have begun communication with you and want to work something out, may make just good business sense, as the environment is going to change a little. I mean, we've had unbelievable economic progress over the last several years, and that may slow just a little bit coming out of this. And so you may want to make some prudent business decisions in general. Charles, do you want to tackle that?
Try that again. I think it comes down to this. It's communicate and document. If you are communicating and reaching out proactively to your residents, I've sent letters out and sent a second round of letters out to my residents. One is, in there it's included, but it's as far as, hey, if you're having trouble, reach out to me. We want to make sure we're working through this. Let me know early, and we'll figure out how to get through this. If I don't know, I can't work with them, and I just assume, as was mentioned, they put their head in the sand. They're just saying, nah, I'm ready to leave. So at that point, I don't have any other options. So eviction is my only option at that point. And when I can show in the event that it comes down to that PR side of things, that I have to, well, I've got to address, the radio station, the television station, somebody showing up and saying, hey, what are you doing? You can say, look, on the 15th of March, we reached out and did this. On the 25th of March, we did this. On April 3rd, we also followed up with everyone who hadn't reached out to us and did this. And by the way, 90% of our people had paid, and we worked out 5%. When you can show those kind of things, suddenly you're not the bad guy. And they're realizing, oh, this really isn't this person is a problem. This resident is actually the problem. But that comes down to documenting, not being defensive, but also communicating. And the other side I mentioned is this: on the documenting, get evidence from the resident, if at all possible, whether it is an email, a letter from their company saying we were released because of COVID-19 or coronavirus issues, drop in business because of this at this time. Get a copy of that and keep it, because that's something that, whether we're dealing with the current phase 3 legislation or potentially down the road with phase 4 legislation, you're going to want to have that documentation in place. If I can follow up on something else too, having that documentation in place, I think it was Tyrone mentioned earlier. He said, what do I tell my bank if my residents aren't paying? One, I'm hoping you've got some reserves. Hopefully you've got some reserves. Reach out to get some. Now's a good time to do it. There's still money out there, and the reality is the Treasury, the IRS, the Federal Reserve are pushing money into the economy as hard as they can. You'll be able to access some. You may not want to, but accessing it and surviving is going to be better. But reach out and pick up the phone and call the bank. Call them early. Like I'm saying about the residents, reach out to them early if you think there might be a problem. And think back to 2008, 9, and 10, where the banks were literally beat up, and they still have scars from that, and have said repeatedly, both to various governors, to the Treasury, we're ready to work with people. We're going to try to figure this out. And they are very much being encouraged to figure it out, because the last thing they want is to be on the news as well. So reach out to them. Now, if you've got an investor and you've got hard money loans, again, you're going to want to sit down with them and try to figure that out as well. But do it early. Don't wait till you're already under the gun at the 11:30th hour and you're stuck. Communicate early and document.
And be accurate as you're talking to them. If they understand where you are, look, most private money lenders, if they're doing this at any volume at all, they don't want 30 properties back that they're having to deal with all at one time without residents, and knowing that they may have a challenge getting residents. So if you are honest with them, if you are proactive, if you work with them, I think you've got a much better shot at it. And as Charles said, with conventional lenders, they're certainly being encouraged from the federal level to work it out with their borrowers. So make sure that you're getting in contact with them. Be very proactive, because from what we've heard, now these are unverified, we don't know for sure, but from what we've heard from our members that are calling in and having conversations, any of them that have reached out proactively are having really good conversations with their lenders and getting some really workable ways to get through this. Now, nobody wants to be in this situation, and you may not love the solution that they give you, but they are proposing what seem to be rational, reasonable ways to work through this situation at the moment.
Rebecca, an example of that is the federal mortgage workout has been, well, if you're behind or you miss 2 months payment, over the next 12 months, you need to pay those 2 months back in time, just like we want you to do with the residents. On the other hand, I've heard from market banks, from a couple of different lenders who've already said, you're going to miss 2 months. We're going to put that on the backside of your loan. And that was a much more workable situation for people. So again, reach out and communicate early.
Jeff, we've got a couple calls coming, a couple of questions coming in. For example, so what if I take a partial payment? What if I'm working with my resident, I take a partial payment, and then all of a sudden they either do something that is unacceptable for a health and safety reason, or at some point they don't come back and they don't make up the rent, then am I stuck because I've taken a partial payment?
Again, I think if you have the document written up well from your local attorney, you will be okay, right? The partial payment's only going to last through a burn-off period, or worst, the rest of the month, right? So you take a partial payment for April, the tenant April 17th blows up on you. Depending on your state, you would be able to begin termination procedures once that partial payment has been exhausted, or at worst, May 1. So that's why I'm not really scared of partial payments right now. But again, it's got to be well drafted, right? You've got to have a document that thinks through those sorts of things, and that's why you need your local attorney, because there are local customs, there are local rules, there are state rules that all are different by city, by state, by fiefdom, literally, as to what you have to do to make sure that that's clear enough to the resident that you could proceed when if they, I hope, if not when, they blow up on you or do something bad. We're still, payment of rent in most states has never been a bar to filing an eviction for some sort of other condition. And I would assume that to the extent we can get evictions going again in some limited fashion, if the tenant really does something, if they're firing their gun in a four-family at the ceiling, that we would be able to do something about that, regardless of a partial payment or not.
If
I
may,
was also.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just I'm going to date myself, but I was going to say one thing about, I agree so much with what Charles and Rebecca said about working with the residents, but I'm going to remind you, if you have never listened to it, there's a great Flip Wilson routine when he realized that he stayed on too long on one of his comedy routines. And he realized he stayed on so long, but then he realized the audience realized that he'd stayed on too long, so he stayed on longer. And then the audience realized that he had stayed on too long, so he stayed on longer. It's a long routine, and I won't spoil the punchline for you. But what I will mention about that is what I remember, and of course this may not be the same type of crisis as we had in 07 and 08, but I do remember a lot of my clients getting into partial payments with tenants. Half a month becomes a month becomes a month and a half, becomes 2 months, over 3 or 4 months, and all of a sudden they feel like they can't evict them because they would lose that 3 months of rent. They'd have they would never get that back. So then it becomes 4 months, and then they're never going to get their 5th month of rent. You know what I mean? It's sort of like the Flip Wilson routine. And they lost. And here's why they lost. Because as the whole thing started to shake out, the one thing that was needed was landlords who would be a little bit flexible on credit terms, who had inventory, right? A landlord who wasn't going to stick to a 780 credit score and no debt to a utility and so forth, was golden at those times. And a lot of you, if you were in the business at that time, took a lot of good people who turned out to be really, really successful because they lost their home. They got foreclosed. They needed a place to live. You had the inventory. You offered it to them. You made out well, right? So balance that Flip Wilson mentality against having some inventory when this is all done, because there are going to be people who are going to be losing their homes, who are going to, need to move in with 2 other friends for a while when they were all living separate and apart. And if you've got some rental housing and are willing to be flexible, I think you are going to be the successful one on the back end of this stuff.
And to put some context to that, for a time frame, please understand everything we're hearing is the supposed peak, which is trying to be flattened, is not going to be until sometime in late April to May. So don't think about this in terms of years, but think about it in terms of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. There's a reason that Congress passed legislation talking about loan forgiveness for 8 weeks. They weren't doing that because they thought this was going to last for 2 to 4. They're looking at 8 to 12 weeks of problem. And that's what we need to kind of put our business mindset on, is planning for that. Which actually leads to one of the questions that was asked. Actually, there's two follow-up questions I want to come back to. One is on loss of rents. And George put a great comment in there. And I want to reiterate that his last statement, which is non-payment of rent is not a covered loss. However, if this changes, we are going to be reaching out to you with headlines of all sorts, because what I'm hearing is in phase 4, that is one of the things that they're looking at, is backstopping some of the insurance companies to provide a backstop for us, because what they do not want to have is turn a instant crisis or an acute crisis into a chronic issue. So they don't want this economic chain to break down, so we start having huge numbers of mortgage defaults, financial defaults, and it starts another 2008 recession process. So that is one of the pieces, and that's part of why they're pushing money out to residents so that they can pay their rent and make payments and get by and not create a crisis. The other question that came up was one on, as a rehabber, what can I do for work? And we've touched on this in other issues, so I just want to refer you back to the website. On the website, we talk about what is an essential employee, what is an essential business. Housing is an essential business. The other side of that is build business and operations. Supporting that housing is considered essential. Now, does that mean that the person who sets up the water bottle and the coffee and all that is necessarily an essential employee? No, they are not. But your maintenance and your basic operations are essential operations. So you're going to want to make sure you verify that with, again, local, state, but every state so far has said they've gone back to the federal guidelines, and the federal guidelines include buildings and operations are essential. Let's face it, folks, if the toilet started backing up or the water stopped in a unit or started flooding down from the 3rd floor, that's not good for anyone. It's going to cascade to housing and a whole lot of other issues going on. So those are essential aspects. Document it, why you believe you're an essential and who's essential in your company. If it's, even if it's a one-man operation, and housing construction is considered essential. Without it, we're not going to overcome this affordability issue. So those are two aspects that we want to make sure we addressed.
You can find some of those guidelines in the FAQ on our website about what is considered essential from federal guidelines. Check your states to make sure. If you're not in a state that is shelter in place, then you have a whole lot more flexibility, because as long as you're doing a rehab and you're practicing social distancing and there's not more than 10 people inside that rehab, moving forward should be able to be allowed, again, as long as your state has not got a shelter in place. If it's shelter in place, you need to check on the housing as an essential business, and that, like I said, that's on the website. To help with that, Home Depot does have is staying open with restricted hours. They also have online ordering, things that you can do through their B2B site, and they have delivery through the website. So we're going to actually be talking with them. They'll be on our call next week to help talk about how they can make sure that you as a rehabber still have the things that you need to move forward. But you can find the resources on whether or not you think you're considered essential under the guidelines that we have in the FAQ. Also, to Jeff's point about how we're going to work with residents moving forward that may have had issues with the payment plan and may have been in a state where evictions were allowed to proceed and may have been evicted because of the COVID. Dave Pickron with Rent Perfect will be on next week as well to talk about how they're going to handle, as a screening company, differences between things that happened pre and post, and how you're going to be able to look at that and what that's going to mean for that process and how you can be prepared to deal with it. Can we talk about, Jeff, you alluded to it, but can we be a a little more specific about late fees and, kind of what happened pre the pandemic being declared, and then where we go from here. I know maybe not encouraging people to not impose late fees if they have specific COVID issues, but how do you deal with the two to make sure you're not tackling fair housing issues later, and what happens pre-post and where that line needs to be drawn?
I mean, late fees has always been sort of the deep, dark hole in our industry anyway, because whether a late fee is reasonable or not has been litigated so many different places in so many different industries, so many different times. I think we've always, at least as a practitioner who follows that issue really, really closely, late fees have always been a little scary to me. And obviously late fees are while they may be a creature of your rental agreement, they still have to meet all the tests because I don't think there's any state, and Rebecca, you can correct me on this, that regulates the amount of late fees on a rental unit. I can't think of any state that I've ever seen that done, but it has to meet certain tests, right? It has to be difficult, if not impossible, to calculate the actual damages at the time the breach is being cured. It's got to be reasonable, and it can never be punitive. And that's been the rule since late fees came over on the Mayflower along with smallpox from Great Britain, right? It's called common law, and that's been the law. It's always been the law. So you're going to have to deal with your own local jurisdictions as it pertains to amounts. I think what we're going to see is a lot of jurisdictions are going to impose some moratorium or some cap on late fees moving forward for a period of time during this and after this. I don't know if you have any of that on the website, whether you found locations that have done it yet. I personally have not seen any, but I'm not, I don't follow it nationwide like NREIA does. But what I'm encouraging you all to do is, consider late fees to be within reason one of the early throwaways if you've got a tenant coming to you saying, I can't make full rent. And again, with documentation, I want to see that they've had that layoff notice. There's a very important difference between this type of layoff and every other layoff, which is if you're doing a COVID-19 layoff, as I understand it nationwide, it doesn't apply to your unemployment compensation insurance calculation as a layoff, against your policy history. And so there are these specialized COVID-19 layoff forms that employers have and would be handing out. So I want to see that type of form. If it's a cutback in hours, it should be the same sort of thing if it's going to help the tenant apply for any sort of unemployment coverage. So everybody should be getting something in their hand, and I want to see that. But when they come to you, late fees are an easy one to throw away because this is just a different time, right? A late fee, we could go into this and spend the next 2 hours on it because I'm a geek about it. I don't want to, but you've always got to think of a late fee as a reinstatement fee. That's the reason you can only charge one per month, is because you're either reinstating the lease with an agreed upon dollar figure, or you're being evicted, or you're leaving, right? And so, when you talk about it in terms of that, I think it makes it easier to swallow that I will forego a reinstatement fee because you and I are renegotiating the terms, at least short term, of our lease agreement with each other. I'm going to accept your rent in weekly installments. I'm going to accept 50% this month, and you're going to pay me that other 50% in 25% increments in August and September. I don't mean to suggest real dates and real numbers here because I'm not trying to do that. It's all mathematical. It all depends on their employment status, how much of their income they've lost. We've been through all that already. But that would, to me, not mean that they're reinstating their lease. That would mean that you're renegotiating the terms in the law. That's called a novation of the lease. We're changing a term or two. We're renegotiating the contract. And that would be why I would argue that it's perfectly safe to waive late fees now because it's not a reinstatement of the lease. It's simply, something that we've renegotiated ourselves. And I think doing it that way and stating it that way, and again, being consistent. You certainly don't want to make people beg a waiver of a late fee if they come to you. If that's part of what you're offering, once they come to you, offer it for fair housing reasons. But I think that by basically saying we waived late fees in these 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is, we did it in writing, we did it as a novation of the contract, your local attorney can help you phrase that in real English, because I'm speaking Latin, which is no good on a Friday afternoon, then it would not violate fair housing. And I think it's the right thing to do.
Following up on that, even as Jeff had mentioned, when you're talking with your residents, be upfront with them. Some residents will say, look, I can't really get help until I get a 3-day notice or a 5-day notice or some sort of, you're late, make a payment. And if you're plugged into your community, you're going to have, where are the charitable foundations, charitable organizations around, making sure that you're providing them in the document up front so that people can get plugged into them. Now, the reality is, as is very obvious with that unemployment chart that Rebecca showed earlier, those places are going to run out of funds. Okay. Do not be surprised by that. Having said that, there are people who are going to say, hey, they're going to feel awkward. I don't really want to ask for a 3-day notice, but I need one, and know what your area needs. Some may need an actual filing. And with the courts closed, you may not even be able to give that to them at that time. So those are things where communicating with a resident is going to become very important. The other one is the job opportunity. There's a psychological aspect of when you lose a job that, you're feeling down. Is the world ending? One of the longest things ever is when you're trying to get a job and somebody says, well, I'll get back to you in a week or two. I need to eat now. And a lot of people are going to be feeling that pressure. So to the extent that you can say, look, hey, we've got this available. I know that these places are hiring. Here's some opportunities for you. And you give them some sort of documentation that, here's some places to go. Here's 2 people who are hiring, just trying to help you out. That goes a long way. Again, move past just the transactional relationship. Folks, we're all in this together as humans, and that's how we're going to have to get through it. So figuring out how to do that, again, keeping your legal pieces in place, but reaching out is going to benefit you in the long run.
And please don't forget, I'm sorry, one thing, Rebecca, don't forget about cultural differences, right? There are some cultures where it's a loss of face to admit that they are not able to pay their rent, and it's much more a shame issue in certain cultures to do that. So be aware that people, you may have to drag it out of them a little bit more, with certain ethnicities, certain cultures, than you would with your, what we all consider to sort of be the quote unquote American tenant. So just be careful about that too. Just because someone first pass looks at you and says, I don't need any help, just remember with whom you're speaking, you may need to pull that out a little bit more in order to be effective at what you're doing.
When Charles says that residents may need a 3-day eviction, what he's saying is to get assistance, just to clarify, to get assistance in some ways, they may need that with a social service organization, with a religious organization, and even maybe depending on your state and local requirements, they may need that for other kinds of assistance that they're getting on the state and local level. So just again, back to communication, communicate with them, see if they need that. You may not want to serve it. They may not want to get it. But if they need it to be able to get help, then the 2 of you can work together to figure out how to do that to best move forward with them. Also, please note, we continue to say that you need to work with your local attorneys. Some of your local REIAs have attorneys that are business associate members at the local level and may be providing some sample language and some sample documents for that. So you can visit with those websites and with your local group to find out if they have those resources available. So thank you, Alan Langston, for pointing that out, that NREIA has those available. Some other groups do as well. Also, we had some questions about, let's say that we do get this stimulus package passed, they do get a check basically from the government. Do we need to have assuming we've given first round of communication, if you need help, let us know. That letter goes out, done and done. And then the state stimulus package goes through and they do get that help. Do we then need to be prepared to send a second round of communication saying, I know many of you have had challenges and you've gotten assistance, and then outlining what the expectations are from there? Is that what you would suggest if this goes forward as expected?
You know, we were talking about this earlier, and I think Mark just put on there, the president just signed the bill. Folks, this is how fluid it is. When we got on here at 1 o'clock, the House had passed the bill. It's signed. There's going to be more bills coming. There's going to be more legislation. And if I can reinforce this, please hold on, because the numbers are just starting to spike in the country, and they're going to continue to go up. As that does, there will be a cranking down. States that are not in stay-at-home are going to start getting stay-at-home orders. States that are in stay-at-home orders maybe see more restrictive regulations coming in. We're going to get through this, but we've got to do it together. Think about how you can become part of a solution. That's how we're going to get through this.
Right. And, you know, at the end of the day, and I always feel like I'm the mercenary when I say this. So y'all can paint me whatever color you want on your screen. But, you know, if somebody's got $1,000 in their pocket and $1,500 worth of bills, they got to spread that money out somehow, right? If you're not asking for your 2/3 of it, if you're not letting them make the first offer to you, then, you know, you might ask for half, and that other $150 or $200 is going to go somewhere else rather than helping keep your arrearage down. So, yeah, I think it's always worth going back to them and saying, you know, it would seem that this is about the time you might have received your first, you know, we're hearing you're getting your government transfer of or direct deposit of money from the, what are they calling it, the TARP program, Charles? Is that, I don't know what they're calling it, but, you know, please get in touch with us now about paying down some more of your arrearage. Those are all very valid things to say. Whether people work with you or communicate with you, time will tell.
The mention of the SBA 7A loan, I really encourage folks to go to our website, look at the 7-page, again, there's a 1-page, a 2-page, and a 7-page document on there. Take a look at that 7-page document, because you've got a whole weekend to start putting your numbers together, putting your packages together. I was literally sitting there calculating it out earlier today, based on what my employees are, based on how much different aspects that are all included in that 7A to apply for with a forgivable loan. That's huge. So again, start putting your numbers together this weekend, look at the documents we have online, stay positive, because we're in this for the long haul, being July to August, folks. It's not that far of a hike, but it's going to be a tough one for a little while.
Also, remember to be creative. That's what investors are known for. If the SBA loans are not available, you know, potentially a small business line of credit. Banks are being encouraged to lend as long as you've had a good track record, you've got good credit, you've got good income possibilities. That's a conversation to have with your bank or other lender. So be creative in how you're approaching that and looking at ways to get through this period. There's lots of questions about specifically what might be available in this package. There's some questions about realtors. I know what they put in and ask for. We're going to need to read and evaluate this for a moment before we're going to give any specifics and advice on this, what has been passed, because it's quite a voluminous bill. We're going to need a moment to be able to look at that and be able to give direction. Couple quick things as well. Questions on whether or not you need to notify your resident if you know that someone that's been in their home as a maintenance person or a vendor has had the virus. I know Jeff has, in other formats where we've spoken with him, said that he is not necessarily comfortable, especially if you're in a multifamily environment, with you giving that notification, because what if you happen to miss one? And if you've started that process and you don't continuing it with every single person, now you're in a position of being in a challenge. So I'll let him deal with that. But notification is one of the questions that we have, and whether or not you can ask your maintenance workers or vendors if they're susceptible to the virus in order to try to protect them. And previous, I think, Jeff, your recommendation has been to be very, very careful and not ask those questions, to maintain an open door policy, to try to communicate, feel like your employees can communicate with you and have that conversation with you, but that if you start delving into their medical history, you're violating all kinds of employment and potentially even HIPAA laws.
Right. So number one, my personal belief is that notification of exposure to the COVID virus by somebody else is really the health department's job. And Rebecca said it very eloquently. You're not going to do it perfectly. You're not going to do it right. You're going to be wrong. That's going to be a much bigger problem than if you allow the local health departments to do what they do best. Where I'm from here in Cincinnati, they just put on TV the other night, if you were at either of these two bars on a certain date, you're supposed to self-monitor. I mean, that's literally what we've gone to. If you went out for a drink 3 days before the shelter in place at these two bars, we have reason to believe you might have been exposed. And we'll let the health department continue to do that for our residents, for vendors, and for maintenance, right? They do the tracing, they do the notifications, because whatever we do, no matter how close to right you think you can be, we're going to be wrong. So unless you have specific authority from the health department to post a notice of some sort, don't, because you're taking on a responsibility that wasn't yours today. And once you start doing it, you have to do it right, and you have to continue doing it. And that is a very slippery slope, right? And then Rebecca also said correctly, I do not believe that you want to specifically ask vendors or employees if they are of compromised health. First of all, I think you probably know. Every one of my clients that calls me says, well, we don't want to put her in a position because she's a smoker or she's had a kidney transplant or something. I mean, we all know, but what we do is we basically say, you know, again, you need to work with your local REIAs or your local attorneys, but to basically do what you see every major employer, Target or Best Buy or Marriott or whatever, doing, which is educating their employees on self-protection, and then giving them the option to opt out if they feel like they can't or shouldn't be doing this, right? And I know that's easier said than done when you've got one maintenance person and they say, I'm opting out. But unfortunately, that's the way of the world right now. You cannot, I don't say you cannot. I think it's a bad idea, and your local attorney, I believe, would agree with me, to force an employee who says, for my health and safety, I don't want to go into apartments where we know someone is suffering from COVID or is recovering from COVID or is in self-quarantine or something like that. The neighbors have all told me this lady's laying in bed groaning. You know, I don't want to go into that apartment for my health. I don't think you should force that person in. You're going to have to subcontract some of that stuff out. You're also going to have to make decisions, again, with your local attorney. I feel like a broken record about what is and isn't maintenance that has to be done right now to meet your duties of maintaining habitability. Every state's duty of habitability is a little different, so we can't obviously tell you online here, you must do this, you must not do that. If it's not an emergency that requires your attention under the duty of habitability, I think you publish new rules right now saying, look, we are not coming in to change furnace filters this month until this is resolved because we do not believe it's necessary under our duty of habitability. If you want a fresh furnace filter and it's normally your position where you replace them, we'll leave one at your door and just let us know you've done it and we won't bug you. Or maybe instead of offering it, you tell people, we're not coming in to change furnace filters this month. We're going to leave them at your door and we expect you to do it. But, again, if anything we can avoid going in for now, I don't want to put it off too much, but at this point, we don't know enough, and I think we don't want to be in there if we absolutely do not have to be.
And just to let you know, some of the questions that we've answered here are answered a little more in depth, or at least in outline form in the FAQ that we have online about working with your maintenance individuals, emergency maintenance work orders, and working with vendors. Last of all, we had a question about for multifamily, do we have to keep the common areas sanitized? That is definitely one of the things that the CDC is providing as guidance to keep, all surfaces as much as possible, free from potential droplets. So there are guidelines on how and what to do on our website. CDC even has guidelines on what they think are approved sanitizers to do that. So making sure that it meets their guidelines. So those CDC guidelines, as they have walked through them, are on the website as well.
I would just add, this is really Charles's original thought, so I'm stealing directly from you, Charles. Be careful not to take on new duties or responsibilities in this time, right? Do not represent that we are going to be adequately sanitizing the elevator 3 times a day. How do we know what that is? How can we promise that we're going to do it? And what does adequately sanitize mean in this day and age? Charles, would you like to maybe finish that thought since it's yours and I stole it?
That's all right. I say that the CDC uses the term sanitize. I like to use the word clean. We may increase our cleaning. We may increase, I've got one resident who's going through. She's very finicky, so I paid her some extra, and every week now for the next several weeks, she's going to go through and just do some wipe downs of touch surfaces. Same thing I have my kids doing. Okay, whether it's doorknobs, handrails, anything that's a little touch surface, go after it. And let me just give you the technical background on that. This virus doesn't last 3 to 4 hours like most viruses. It actually lasts 12 to 72 hours on a surface. So if somebody has coughed into their hand, coughed in general, the droplets hit, it's going to stay on that surface for up to 3 days. That's part of what contributes to the spread of this virus. So the more we can have just regular cleaning without taking on any additional work, we are just doing additional cleaning. That's why I kind of grimace when we say sanitize. But let your residents know if somebody asks, yes, we are doing additional cleaning, especially of touch surfaces. And let it sit. I would not overcommit on that aspect of it, because you don't want them coming back saying, well, the vector that I got this disease from was because of,
Charles, can they just simply say, if they are following CDC guidelines as outlined on our website, can they just simply say we're following CDC guidelines and leaving it at that?
We are following to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, please add to the best of your abilities, right? Because these CDC guidelines might change overnight, and you may not hit it at 8 in the morning, and someone may pick it up at 8:01, and you promised something. You just want to be really, really careful about that. And then lastly, we're getting a lot of pushback from residents in buildings with common amenities, community rooms, weight rooms, pools, squash courts. I don't know what you all have, but you know, especially people who are paying a lot of money for rent, for some reason think that that gives them the legal entitlement to have the pool room still open, and the answer to that is no. You know, all the first and best thing you can do is close off all that stuff to reduce the burden of cleaning on you and your staff, right? Get those things off the list first. Sorry you can't play pool during this crisis. Sorry you can't use the movie room during this crisis. We can't promise we can keep it clean enough or safe enough, so we've opted to close it.
And put the notice up there and blame it on the CDC, blame it on the governor, the health director, whoever it is. Attribute it right to them based on this ruling, this executive order on this day. This is it. And you know, each state, they've got the executive orders out there, they've got the rules out there. Find it, put it out there. That way you're not the bad guy. You're just saying, hey, we're in the same situation you are. I would love to open up this area, but I cannot. The one caveat I'll give to this is laundry rooms. To the extent possible, if you have a laundry room, please keep it open. Laundry rooms are needed, and smaller laundry rooms in different areas are much better than sending all the residents over to the laundromat where they all get infected and bring it back to your place. Just think about that.
Most states specifically prohibit gyms from being open, and the CDC prohibits gatherings of more than 10. So that those are languages that you can find generally in your state's guidance that you can absolutely post. With the laundry room, you may want to just make sure that you mention that they have to social distance. Is, you know, policy now that they have to social distance while they're in there, and there can be no more than 10 in, depending on how big your laundry room is, but certainly no more than 10 people in that laundry room at one time. And as Scott, as Charles said, make sure that that you're directing them back to the directives of your state or local guidelines, because those are different from state to state, and you generally are going to be able to pull some language there. Scott mentions in the chat bar that live showings are maybe an issue, but if you're social distancing, that's a whole another issue. We are going to be covering those things on the call next week about what if I have a rehab that I'm ready to put on the market, or what if I'm doing showings for rentals. Those are all things that we're going to talk about next week about how you could do that virtually. But certainly if you're doing those things now, make sure you're practicing social distancing. In many of your locations, it is going to be a misdemeanor if you're not practicing social distancing, even if it is for those kinds of things.
Yeah, can you imagine that? What are you in for? Murder. What are you in for? Social distancing.
You're on the Group W bench.
Skit that I prepared on this, but we'll do that offline. But guys, we are running over significantly for our session today. Just wanted to try to cover as many items and questions that we had through the questions and chat bar as possible. Almost all of these things can be answered or directed to our website at National REIA. Click on the red bar that's the COVID updates, and from there you can jump off for everything from SBA info to guidelines to sample documents. Those can be, some of those are located. If they're shareable documents and examples, most of that is actually residing on unitinginvestors.org. All of that information has been available to you in the chat bars. Lori's been so kind to provide those web updates. So thank you so much for participating. Ron, I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. And I believe, Rebecca, we're having another call for next Friday?
Next Friday at 4 o'clock, same time, same station. We'll be getting those pieces of information out to you on what the agenda will be and how to register.
Okay, so everybody remember that, as Rebecca said, we will be periodically updating the National REIA website with any important updates for you, but we hope to see all of you back next Friday. And In the meantime, stay safe and stay healthy.